When we look back at the Reagan presidency, we don't actually have to look back. Many of the same people who populated his administration are in the George W. Bush administration as well. James Baker, Elliot Abrams, Paul Wolfowiz, Colin Powell, John Poindexter, John Negroponte, just to name a few. We're joined on the telephone right now by political analyst, critic, Noam Chomsky, professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, author of scores of books. His latest is Hegemony or Survival. Welcome to Democracy Now! Noam.
Hi.
It's good to have you with us. Can you talk about this? The people that are now running the administration are the very people who ran the Reagan administration more than 20 years ago.
That's quite true. The Reagan administration is either the same people or their immediate mentors for the most part. I think one can say that the current administration is a selection of the more extremist and arrogant and violent and dangerous elements of the Reagan administration. So things like, it's true both on domestic and international policy. They're both in the Reagan years and now they're committed to dismantling the components of the government that serve the general population, Social Security, probably schools, and so on and so forth, but in a more extreme fashion now, partly because they think they've achieved a sort of higher stage from which to launch the attack. And internationally, well, it's pretty obvious. In fact, many of the older Reaganites and Bush #1 people have been concerned, even appalled by the extremism of the current administration in the international domain. That's why there was such unprecedented elite criticism of the national security strategy and the implementation in Iraq. Narrow criticism, but significant. So yes, they're there. In fact, you can't, and some of the examples are remarkable, including the ones you mentioned, and very timely. Take, say, Negroponte. Negroponte has, of course, just been appointed, and the new ambassador to Iraq, where he will head the biggest diplomatic mission in the world. The pretense is that we need this huge diplomatic mission to transfer full sovereignty to Iraqis. I mean, that's so close to self-contradiction that you have to admire commentators who sort of pretend not to notice what it means. Also, who overlook consciously what his role was in the Reagan administration. He also provided, he was an ambassador in the Reagan years, or ambassador to Honduras, where he presided over the biggest CIA station in the world, not because, and the second largest embassy in Latin America, and not because Honduras was of any particular significance to the U.S., but because he was responsible for supervising the bases from which the U.S. mercenary army was attacking Nicaragua, and which ended up practically destroying it. By now, Nicaragua's be lucky to survive a few generations. That was one part of the massive international terrorist campaign that the Reaganites carried out in the 1980s under the pretense that they were fighting a war on terror. They declared a war on terror in 1981 with pretty much the same rhetoric that they used when they redeclared it in September 2001. And it was a murderous terrorist war. It devastated Central America, had horrendous effects elsewhere in the world. In the case of Nicaragua, it was so extreme that they were condemned by the World Court two supporting Security Council resolutions that the U.S. had to veto. After which, of course, they rejected the court judgment and then escalated the war to the point where finally, where the effects were extraordinary. I mean, by the analysis of their own specialists, the per capita deaths in Nicaragua would be comparable to about 2.5 million in the United States, which, as they've pointed out, is greater than the total number of casualties in all U.S. wars, including the Civil War and all wars in the 20th century. And what's left of the society is a wreck. Since the U.S. took over again, it's gone even more downhill. Now the second poorest in the hemisphere after Haiti, and not coincidentally, the second major target of U.S. intervention in the 20th century after Haiti, which is first. Recent health administration statistics show that about 60% of children under 2 are suffering from severe anemia caused by malnutrition and probable brain damage. About half the working age population is abroad. Costa Rica, United States, doing enough low-level work so they can send back some remittances to keep the families alive. It's a real victory. You can understand why Colin Powell and others are so proud of it. But Negroponte was in charge of it in the first half of the decade directly, and the second half more indirectly in the State Department and the National Security Staff, where he was Powell's advisor. And now he's supposed to undertake the same role similar role in Iraq. He was called in Nicaragua the proconsul, and after the Wall Street Journal was honest enough to run an article in which they headlined "Modern Proconsul," on which they mentioned his background in Nicaragua without going into it much, and said, yes, he'll be the proconsul of Iraq. Well, that's a direct continuity, but there's a lot more than that. And what you mentioned is correct. I mean, Elliot Abrams is an extreme case. I mean, he's now the head of the Middle East section of the National Security Council. He was, as you know, he was sentenced for lying to Congress. Got a presidential pardon, but he was one of the most. He was in charge in the State Department of the Central American atrocities, and on the Middle East, he's way out at the extreme end of the spectrum, and this does reflect in a way, the continuity of policies, but also the shift towards extremism within that continuity.
There was very little critical comment about President Reagan this weekend on his death, perhaps explained by his death, what happens when a person dies and what people say, or perhaps also because there is a kind of rewriting of history that has been going on. But one of the few people who were quoted in the mainstream media was the Mexican foreign minister, the former Mexican foreign minister, Jorge Castaneda, whose father served as foreign minister as well, 1979 to 1982, said Reagan was extremely unpopular in Mexico when he was president because of his policies in Central America and what was viewed in Mexico as a Mexico-bashing campaign over drug trafficking. Reagan's involvement in Nicaragua and El Salvador, viewed in Mexico, he said, as unwarranted meddling that was, quote, interventionist, rooted in Cold War rivalries, and disrespectful of international law. Castaneda continued, not only were his policies viewed negatively, but he pressured Mexico enormously to change its foreign policies.
That's correct. Castaneda is being diplomatic. It wasn't, he's understating with regard to international law and with regard to the intervention. it was, it ended up with a couple 100,000 people being killed and 4 countries ruined. Even the U.S. The people now in office in Washington have the unique honor of being the only ones in the world who have been condemned by the World Court for International Terrorism. It's a little more than what he said, but that's what he's aiming at. The unpopularity continues. The latest figures show that George Bush, number 2, latest Latin American figures among Latin American elites, the ones who tend to be more supportive of the United States. I think it was about close to 90% opposition throughout the hemisphere, and approximately, if I remember, 98% opposition to him in Mexico. But to be accurate, we should say that this goes way back. So John F. Kennedy tried very hard to get Mexico to line up in his anti-Cuba crusade. There was a famous comment by a Mexican foreign minister when Kennedy tried to convince him that Cuba was to join in the terrorist war against Cuba and the economic embargo, strangulation, in fact, on the grounds that Cuba was a threat to the security of the hemisphere. And the Mexican ambassador said he had to decline, foreign minister had to decline, because if he tried to tell people in Mexico that Cuba was a security threat, 40 million Mexicans would die laughing, which is approximately the right answer. Here, not so. The one point on which I think Castañeda's comment that you quote is really misleading is when he refers to Cold War thinking and rivalries. There were no Russians in Latin America. In fact, the U.S. was trying very hard to bring them in. Take, say, Nicaragua. When the terrorist war against Nicaragua really took off, Nicaragua tried to get some military aid to defend itself. And they went first to European countries, France, others. The Reagan administration put extreme pressure on them not to send military aid because they were desperately eager for Nicaragua to get military aid from Russia or indirectly through Cuba, so they could then present it as a Cold War issue. Nicaragua didn't fall into the trap as Guatemala had in 1954, basically same scenario. So they didn't get jet planes from Russia to defend their airspace against U.S. attacks. They had every right to do it, but even a responsibility to do it, but they understood the consequences. So the Reagan administration had to float constant stories about how Nicaragua was getting MiG jets from Russia in order to try to create a Cold War conflict. Actually, it's very revealing to see the reaction here to those stories. Of course, Nicaragua had every right to do it. The CIA had complete control over Nicaragua's airspace and was using it. It was using it to send communications to the guerrilla army, which was, guerrilla is a funny word for it. They had computers, helicopters, and so on, to send them instructions so that they could follow the U.S. command orders to avoid the Sandinista army, the Nicaraguan army, and to attack what are called soft targets, undefended civilian targets. Now, if a country doesn't have a right to defend its airspace to protect that, I don't know what you can say. So obviously they had a right to do it, but they didn't. They allowed the U.S. to have control of the airspace and to attack, to use it to attack undefended targets.
Noam Chomsky, you've written about the U.S. as being the only country in the world to be convicted in the World Court of terrorism, and this had to do with the bombing of the Nicaraguan harbor, which took place under Reagan. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that too is a little misleading. Nicaragua was hoping to end the confrontation through legal means, through diplomatic means.
I mean the mining of the harbor.
Yes, the mining of the harbors. And they decided to, they asked a legal team headed by a very distinguished American international lawyer, Abe Chase, professor of law at Harvard, who had long government service. And that legal team decided to construct an extremely narrow case. So they kept to matters that were totally uncontroversial because the U.S. conceded them, like the mining of the harbors. But that was only a toothpick on a mountain. They picked the narrowest point in the hope that they could get a judgment from the World Court, which would lead the United States to back off from the whole international terrorist campaign. And they did win a judgment from the court, which ordered the U.S. to terminate any actions, any violent actions against Nicaragua, which went way beyond mining of the harbors. That was the least of it. So yes, that was the narrow content of the court decision, although if you read the court decision, it goes well beyond. They're all, of course, conscious of the much wider terrorist campaign, but the Harvard, the Chase-run legal team didn't bring it up for good reasons. They didn't want any controversy at the court hearings about the facts, and there was no controversy about that since it was conceded. However, it should be read as a much broader indictment, and a very important one. The term that was used by the court was unlawful use of force, which is the technical term for the informal notion, international terrorism. There's no legal definition of international terrorism in the international domain. But it was in effect a condemnation of international terrorism over a much broader domain. However, we should bear in mind, it's important for us, that horrible as the Nicaragua war was, it wasn't the worst. Guatemala and El Salvador were worse. It's just that in Nicaragua, and the reason was that in Nicaragua, the population at least had an army to defend it. In El Salvador and Guatemala, the terrorist forces attacking the population were the army and the other security forces, and there was no one to bring a case to the World Court that can be brought by governments, not by peasants being slaughtered.
Professor Chomsky, we have to break, and when we come back, we will also be joined by Bob Perry, Robert Perry, who reports for AP and Newsweek, whose reporting led to the expose of the Iran-Contra scandal. We're speaking with Professor Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, author, among many other books, of Hegemony or Survival. Stay with us.